Okay, the panel today is on the theme of narrating COVID-19, and we have 5 speakers, and it'd be really great if we could stick to time, just because it is a late session, and the conference dinner will follow shortly after that. Now, we have 2 people. The first 2 speakers will be zooming in, I guess. So hopefully Krzysztof Wasilewski will be joining us online. I will read out the biography while that's being set up. Krzysztof is an associate professor of political science and media studies at the Koszalin University of Technology. He's the vice rector for education. His academic interests include international politics of memory, digital memory, and local heritage activism. He's been awarded national and foreign grants and scholarships at the following institutions: the Roosevelt Institute for American Studies, the John F. Kennedy Institute for North American Studies, Cambridge University, University of Michigan Ann Arbor, and the Polish National Science Center. And hopefully he will be joining us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you at present.
I will try to... Can you see my presentation?
Not currently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, I can't see them.
No, at home I can see it. Not in the...
Okay, we're ready when you are.
Okay. Yeah, can you see it now?
We can see you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for allowing me to present some of the research that I have conducted in the last couple of years on alternative collective memories and digital media and social media in particular, because this is what I will be focusing on in my presentation. I would like to show you how conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19 pandemics have impacted the construction of alternative collective memories and what that results in for the mainstream collective memory, as to say. So my presentation will be from the perspective of media studies. I hope this new perspective will give something new to the study on collective memory, on memory as a whole, because I believe that media and the media studies can provide a very interesting in-look into what into how memories, contemporary memories, are shaped and can be changed. So let's first start from the beginning. That is, what is a conspiracy theory? Because there are many definitions that refer to this term, and sometimes they are they have something in common, but sometimes they disagree with one another. Here I would like to refer to the definition provided by the Douglas, Uściński, Sutton, and Cichocka, Nefes, and others in their renowned paper on understanding conspiracy theories in political psychology. In their opinion, conspiracy theories are attempts to explain the ultimate causes of significant social and political events and circumstances with claims of secret plots by 2 or more powerful actors. While often, though, as addressing governments, conspiracy theories could accuse any group perceived as powerful and malevolent. I think this is the last sentence is key here, because it clearly states that conspiracy theories does not have to refer to the governmental actions. They may refer to any doing by a group or even by individual, and this is most important when we consider contemporary conspiracy theories, those theories that are spread and disseminated by social media, because most of them are not directly against the governmental actions, but they are directed at other actors as well. Shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic's outbreak, some conspiracy theories began to emerge, not just in the social media, but in media general and among people as well. As you can see in the presentation, the COVID-19, just as it was said in previous lectures presented here during today's conference, that conspiracy theories about the same event may differ in different countries, and here we have the same case when COVID-19 was either considered as a Chinese way of waging a war against the US or vice versa. Such conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19 were many. They are still present in the social media, but if we get into conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19, we will see that there is not one conspiracy theory concerning the pandemics, but there are many. Of course, some of them are more popular, some of them are less popular, but somehow when we look for the point that would join them together is that very mistrust towards the government, towards the elites, and towards the science as a whole. Whoever was to blame for the COVID, whether it was the Chinese government or the American government or the European Union, what kept them together was that in those conspiracy theories, it was the elite to blame for the pandemics, or even for disseminating the information about the pandemics that did not happen at all, as some of the conspiracy theories stated. And before I go to the research, before I present you the research, I would like to say a few words about collective memory and how collective memory is shaped by the media. Most researchers, most scholars agree that in contemporary society, it is the media, especially the internet media, that shape our collective memory. What we remember and what we forget, we learn from the media, from the social media. This is the key actor in collective memory, unlike, for example, family or church community, as it used to be a few decades ago. Now the media played a crucial role in shaping the collective memory. And this is why it is important to research on media while researching on collective memory, because without the media, we cannot learn about collective memory and indicate its main frames. Those conspiracy theories emerged in a certain online environment. In the media studies, we call them parasitic publics. It means that publics created by some alternative, usually radical media, that are most often met in the cyberspace, for example, in Twitter accounts or Facebook accounts and so on. Those parasitic publics may not be large when it comes to the number of its users. It may be a few dozens of people or a few hundreds, but they still have some impact on the mainstream publics or the mainstream public sphere. It means that those ideas, those narrations that appear in parasitic publics may easily move to the mainstream public sphere and then impact, for example, collective memory of a greater group or even of the whole society. Those parasitic publics, they depend on a set of certain frames which correspond with the group that creates such a parasitic public. For example, radical right or left right or radical left movements, which use their own narration, their own media frames to frame the event or any other process contrary to the mainstream understanding of this event or process. And here on this in this diagram, you can see how counter-publics, for example, just like parasitic publics, correspond with mainstream public sphere, how these two spheres are interconnected, and certain ideas, certain narrations that appear in counter-publics may easily move to the mainstream media, and there we could say to affect the general atmosphere or the general positions of people in society. So even though counter-publics, parasitic publics, may not be big when it comes to the number of the users, they still have access to the mainstream public sphere, and as such may influence what happens in public sphere, how certain events, how certain processes are framed there, how are narrated there, and in the end, how these events are received by people. Of course, the key role here is played by social media and their ability to bypass so-called mainstream media, how they can bypass the information flow without using mainstream media outlets. Social media allow a great number of users to learn about the information that otherwise would never appear in the mainstream public sphere. And when we come to COVID-19 and radical movements, here's an excerption from one of the papers published in the Politico website, which stated that people seizing on the pandemic range from white supremacists and anti-vaxxers in the US to fascist and anti-refugee groups across Europe. They also include far-right populists on both continents had previously tried to coordinate their efforts after the 2016 American presidential election. Especially in the US, the conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19 were strongly related to the theories concerning President Trump, concerning 2020 presidential election. Because the presidential election took place during the pandemic, so these two events were joined by those radical groups. And as you can see, research carried out by various scholars confirmed that it was most often it was the radical right movements that spread conspiracy theories concerning COVID-19. And when you see to this diagram, you will see that coronavirus and conspiracy theories, they correspond closely after the outbreak of coronavirus, which means that in the social media, especially in Twitter and Facebook, these two terms were often searched for simultaneously, and it also indicates how many conspiracy theories about coronavirus appeared and what was their impact on the users of various social media. You can see that not just those parasitic publics that created conspiracy theories and lived on conspiracy theories, but also conspiracy theories moved somehow to the mainstream media because of the huge amount of search for explanations of the COVID-19 pandemics done by internet users. And here's another statistics considering US adults who think that theory that the coronavirus outbreak was intentionally planned by powerful people is. And you can see that when it comes to all American citizens, it's 25% that thought that that statement that I read was definitely true or probably true, which is rather a huge number of people, not just users of those parasitic public spheres or of those radical movements, because we cannot say that 1/4 of the American society uses radical media or takes knowledge from radical media, but you can see that it is a proof that those conspiracy theories that first appeared in those parasitic publics, they somehow moved to the mainstream publics and infected the way of thinking by a great number of American people. Of course, there is a difference between more and less educated people, between those who support the Democrats and those who supported Republicans, but still the 25% is quite a big number, I would say, especially if you take a look at the people who have just high school or less. It's 48% that think that thought definitely true or probably true that the coronavirus outbreak was intentionally planned by powerful people. And somehow even Democrats who were considered to be less prone to conspiracy theories, somehow at least 18% of them thought that it could be true. As you can see that quite a considerable number of young people, meaning that those the target who uses social media the most, it's that people between 18 and 49, it's still over 1/4 of the whole population that believe that the coronavirus outbreak was intentionally planned by powerful people. And the discourse that appeared on the COVID-19, especially in the social media, we can say that it has been largely politicized because this discourse is still on. It did not end with the coronavirus pandemic, so with the first stage of the coronavirus pandemics, but it's still present in the media. And it means that the pandemics has not been perceived through health frames, but through political frames. In other words, most posts published on the social media concerning the pandemics included statements made by politicians, not by scientists or medics. And it gives you an idea why those conspiracy theories bloomed that easily in the social media. Is because since the very beginning, the COVID-19 was considered as a political issue, not as a health issue. And here you have some examples that I took from, at that time, Twitter. Now it's X platform. These are some examples of posts published by one of the far-right radical movements on the Twitter. For example, struggling Biden administration prepares to drastically change COVID hospitalizations, the way COVID hospitalizations are counted. Breaking, 22 million Americans are out of work, but Democrats are more focused on pushing their radical progressive agenda. And climate change activists are now reportedly attempting to exploit the coronavirus. These are some of the examples from different periods of the coronavirus outbreak, from 2020, but also from 2021, meaning from the period when Donald Trump was still in the White House, and later when the presidency was taken over by Joe Biden. And we can say that conservative media and influencers engage in network amplification of politicized information and misinformation significantly more than liberal media and influencers did. So again, it was the radical movements, far-right radical movements, alt-right movements, or even conservative movements associated with the Tea Party that that provided resources to disseminate conspiracy theories on the COVID-19 pandemics. And coming to the conclusions, we can say that the politicization of the right-wing discourse on COVID-19 has laid the foundations for the remembrance of the pandemics as a political struggle, because this is the main thesis that can be tested in this research, is that those radical discourses do not only shape the public sphere, the mainstream public sphere, but also they may influence how and what we remember centered things, and in this case, the pandemics. So in this radical collective memory shaped by social media, mostly by social media, President Trump's response to COVID-19 was to be remembered as balanced yet decisive, while the actions taken and proposed by his opponents as reckless and unsuccessful. Radical movements have created their own events and persons worth commemoration in the future. And COVID-19 served as a possible tool to divide political periods in US and elsewhere as well, according to the stages of the pandemics itself, as well as other political developments. What I think is crucial here is that third conclusion, meaning that radical movements or those movements that created various conspiracy theories, they created their own events and persons worth commemoration, meaning some alternative collective memories on the COVID-19 has taken root, and probably in a few years we will see that our memories considering COVID-19 are very different from the memories of other groups. What is the most striking is that those events and people who either happened or were real, but sometimes they refer to the events or people that never happened, never took place, meaning that the collective memory constructed by radical movements consists of real events and people, as well as of fake events as people, which provides a new problem for the collective memory, and as a result for the coherence, for the society coherence. So some more examples just to end my presentation and to support what was said before. Here are some examples from Twitter as well. Nearly half of likely 2020 voters think the mainstream media is using the coronavirus to try to hurt President Donald Trump. They're exactly right. The fake news media has been shameful throughout the entire process. So when we consider that the mainstream media is one of the main actors that shape our collective memory, when we disregard what the mainstream media say about the coronavirus, we create a new collective memory alternative to the mainstream collective memory. Another example, breaking January, Peter Navarro was trying to warn the American people about the devastating effects of the coronavirus. While the Trump administration was taking quick, decisive action, what were Democrats doing, dragging the country through their failed impeachment? So here we can see the creation of new of those people worth remembering, of those who will be remembered for their actions, but only for this radical group, not for the mainstream, not in the mainstream collective memory. And the last example, this is amazing. A 95-year-old World War II veteran just beat the coronavirus. When he was asked how he did it, he said, "I survived foxholes in Guam. I can get through this coronavirus," and you can read the rest. So you can see that the power of those conspiracy theories that previously, before the social media, were limited to those radical movements, that were not very numerous when it comes to their size and the number of people who believed in conspiracy theories. Due to the easy access and common access to the social media, we can see that conspiracy theories, not just on the coronavirus, but on other phenomena as well, they have ability to impact the mainstream public sphere, and as such to create alternative collective memory, or even impact this mainstream collective memory. That's all for me. Thank you for your attention, and I hope there will be some questions that I could deliver more on my research that I presented. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll take the questions at the end, should we? Just to make sure we finish on time. So our next speaker is also going to be zoomed in. This is Liat Steyer-Livni, an associate professor at Sapir Academic College and the Open University of Israel. She teaches in the Department of Culture at Sapir Academic College, the Cultural Studies MA program, and the Department of Literature, Language and the Arts at the Open University of Israel. Her research focuses on Holocaust commemoration in Israel from the 1940s until the present and combines Holocaust studies, memory studies, cultural studies, trauma studies and film studies. She's the author of many articles and 5 books.
Hi, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, you can see it? With the picture and everything?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm sorry I can't be in Warsaw, but that's the way it is. So, I'm going to talk about what happened in Israel during 2020, which is the time in which COVID-19 was at its peak. Israel went through 3 times of lockdowns in which we had to stay at home, the shops were closed, the education system was closed, and so on. And I would like to talk to you today about the connection, what seems impossible, but was possible in Israel, between COVID-19 and Holocaust associations. And what I want to show you is how the memory and the post-memory of the Holocaust became a frame of reference for the interpretation of COVID-19 pandemic for many Israelis. And there is a division, I found a division between the first half of 2020 and the second half. And I want to show you how in the first half of 2020, Israeli Jews compared between the pandemic and the Holocaust. And in the second half, when they understood the pandemic is a very hard disease, but it's not the Holocaust, they began referring to the law enforcement during COVID-19 through Holocaust association. So first of all, I want to briefly talk about collective trauma, as was mentioned before, but through the prism of Israel and Holocaust awareness within Israel. So for those of you who do not know it, the Holocaust was and remains a central trauma in Israel national consciousness. It's been 8 decades since the Holocaust, but the memory of the trauma have not faded over the years. On the contrary, I've shown in my research, and I've written a lot about the way that from the 1980s onward, for political and social and demographic reasons, the awareness of the Holocaust is just strengthened, and the new generations, the young generations, see themselves as part of this collective memory. Research has also shown that Israeli media, educational system, and cultural fields and public discourse in Israel all frame the Holocaust as a current ongoing local trauma, meaning it's not something that happened in the past far, far away in Europe and North Africa, but it's something that has to do with all of us in Israel, the young generations and the older generation. Now, you can understand that in such a post-traumatic society, which acts out the trauma, it doesn't work through the trauma, but acts it out, Holocaust memory and post-memory are not limited only to Holocaust-related subjects, meaning there are many topics within the Israeli public debate, political topics, social, ethnical, and so on, in which people use Holocaust associations. Therefore, what I'm about to show you right now is not a new thing, meaning combining the Holocaust with a disease. It's just the latest link in a long chain of combinations between Holocaust awareness or Holocaust memory and other topics who are not Holocaust related. So we're talking about 2020, and from the first lockdown, the associations of Holocaust and comparing between what's happening in Israel, meaning we have to stay in, we can't go out, and so on, emerged in journalism and media. If the former talk discussed social media, I'm about to focus here mainly on the old media, meaning TV and newspapers. And journalist Rana Shaked, who is a very prominent journalist in Israel, he wrote a column named Corona Blues. And he wrote, Corona is a ghetto. There is nowhere to run. You cannot go abroad and escape the Corona. And if you go abroad and try to escape the Corona, then you'll discover that it was conquered as well by Corona forces. Meaning, Corona is like Nazism. There's nowhere to escape, and we are the Jews once again caught up in front of this horrible disaster, and we have nothing to do. You can see the other clip here, and the title says, like the entertainers in Warsaw Ghetto, I attended the last stand-up show in Israel. It sounds so deterministic, but it was the last stand-up show before the first lockdown, okay? but everybody was so panicked that the hysteria and the memories from the Holocaust fed the Israeli memory, and these are the associations that people used. You can find it also on social media, on old media, when people discussed comparisons between the Holocaust and what's happening today. We don't know what to do. We don't know what the future will bring. We have to stay in. We can't see our parents and so on. And even in Israel, Holocaust survivors were brought in into news studios to talk to the public and explain to the public. And I guess it sounds a bit ridiculous to people who don't live in Israel, but in Israel, it was so understandable that Holocaust survivors sit in news studios and talk to the public and tell them that in the Holocaust, it was much worse. So we should calm down and understand that this is the situation and so on. And here you can see this Holocaust survivor, Naftali First. He was liberated from Buchenwald. He brought this picture with him. And he said during the interview, "You're home. Do you have a blanket? Do you have something to eat? You're not getting bitten. You are employed. Do you know your daughter and grandchildren are healthy? So it's not so terrible." Meaning we have to get some proportions and we don't need to be sad because in the Holocaust, it was much, much worse. Association of the Holocaust were used by survivors also to scorn the public which misbehaved. Again, we had to stay home, but there were people who broke curfew and went out. And then Holocaust survivor Arya Nativ posted on Yediot Achronot, another prominent newspaper in Israel, was also in the digital Yediot Achronot, and he wrote, "After the ghetto was liquidated, we stayed for a year and a half in a small basement underground without going out once. We did not see the sunlight, the sky, the stars. We did not breathe fresh air. So to see Israelis during the lockdown go to the beach and break the lockdown infuriates me. I sat in a small basement with more than 30 people. Today, people are at their homes with their loved ones, TV, food, and they are still complaining." And when it was posted online, this post received 10,000 likes. It was shared 1,500 times, and all the comments talked about this connection that people did between COVID and the Holocaust. For example, a lady here says, "You're so right. Every time I want to complain, I contemplate about the Holocaust." And another one wrote, "Yes, in the last couple of months, all I heard about the Holocaust. Now I can understand the Holocaust more than every time before," and so on. It became such a trend to compare COVID-19 and the lockdowns to the Holocaust that a third-generation poet named Efrat Briner had to publish a post in which she begged the Israeli public to stop comparing. And she wrote that, "As a third generation who grew up on the knees of stories of hunger, death, and terror, I'm appalled to hear people comparing life under Corona what my grandparents went through a few decades ago. When our refrigerators are full and the forced isolation is for the purpose of protecting us, when we have a country that works tirelessly to give citizens the best care, how do we have any right to compare? Staying at home with the children is not separation through selection for life and death. The desire to see the world is not death marches," so on and so on. And she continued, but this plea was not answered, not in the first 6 months of the year. And this comparison, it's very important for me to highlight it, came not only from the public, but also from politicians. We mentioned the Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel around April. And in April, we have this big ceremony in Yad Vashem, which is the main museum for Holocaust commemoration. And it is customary that the prime minister gives a speech each year in the Yad Vashem ceremony. So in 2020, Netanyahu, who was then the prime minister, talked about the Holocaust, as he should. It's a Holocaust Remembrance Day. But then he said, "We are dealing with a dangerous pandemic. In the ghettos and camps, epidemics have raged. The concentration of tens of thousands of Jews in a limited area caused countless victims. Today, we have a national home, strong state. At the same time, Israel must always be responsible for its own destiny to defend ourselves. Unlike in the Holocaust, in the Corona case, we recognize the danger in time." So he didn't only made this connection once again and used the Holocaust to discuss COVID, or used COVID to discuss the Holocaust, but it also gave it a Zionistic lesson, a Zionist lesson, meaning now we have a state, then we were helpless, so we can compare and contrast. This is the main thing. Now, this comparison has passed after several months. In the second half of the year, most Israelis understood that COVID is indeed a pandemic, but it's not a Holocaust. People are sick, but many people get better, and so on. So this comparison, saying that COVID-19 equals the Holocaust and you can compare and contrast, stopped. But I began to find them in other places, meaning when talking about law enforcement and talking about vaccination that began to appear in the second half of the year. And I want to give you some examples. So here you can see on the left, his name is Rami Beja. He is the head of the Self-Employed Society, and they suffered enormously during the lockdowns because the stores had to be closed. And he talks about the way they protest, and they want to save their livelihood. And he's using the term, he's saying to the interviewer, we're not going to go like lambs to the slaughter. Now, this term, like lamb to the slaughter, is taken from the Holocaust. This is a term or a phrase coined by Abba Kovner, who was in the Vilnius ghetto. He was a partisan. This is a very well-known sentence in Israel, and it was used here to discuss the self-employed protest in the face of COVID. Another example is that on December 21st, 2020, the Corona cabinet decided to send people who returned to Israel from abroad directly from the airport to special hotels because they were afraid that people who are sick on the plane are going to infect other people in Israel. So they were sent directly from the plane to hotels. But like Israel does many times, these people were not alerted before, and they discovered it only when they landed in Israel, and there was a big chaos. And here, this young woman who was interviewed on TV said it was horrible. The elderly felt like in Auschwitz. Okay, and we're talking about people who were sent to hotels in Tel Aviv. The equivalence to the Holocaust and treating policemen as Nazis was to be found many times within the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel. What happened with them during COVID is that they didn't obey the restrictions. They lived their own life. When the general educational system was closed, their schools were open, stores were open, they had their celebrations. If they had to go to a funeral with a mass of people, they did it. So policemen had to come to their quarters and their neighborhoods many times. And each time they protested against the policemen trying to enforce the lockdown, they used the words Nazis to describe the policemen. And here is another case within the ultra-Orthodox society. Every year, many people go to the grave of Reb Nachman of Uman in Uman, Ukraine, in the Hebrew beginning of the year. This is September. Now, because of COVID, the prime minister knew that there are going to be there tens of thousands of people, and he asked the Ukraine government to close the border between Poland and Ukraine. And what happened is that many ultra-Orthodox people gathered on the border between Poland and Ukraine, and also in Israel, and wore a yellow badge, meaning now they are the Jews that are that the government tries to seize and stop and look after and so on. So this was their way of protesting against the Israeli government, who tried to save them from getting infected using the yellow badge. But the worst thing was when the vaccine arrived. The vaccines arrived towards the end of 2020, and the anti-vaccination movement constantly used Holocaust associations. Here you can see a TV interview. You can see a guy sits with the interviewer. He wears the uniform of prisoners in concentration camps, and again, the yellow badge, but now it doesn't say Jew, it says not vaccinated. Another thing was the green passport, meaning the government said that all the people who will get vaccinated will get a green passport. And then when they want to enter restaurants and so on, they can show the green passport. Everybody will know that they are vaccinated, that everything's fine. But the anti-vaccination movement compared between the yellow badge and a green passport. And here you can see this comparison, again, wearing yellow badge. The doctors who engaged with the vaccinations was titled with the names of very famous Nazi doctors like Joseph Mengele and so on. Here you can see again the yellow badge, but instead of Jew, it says spreads diseases. This is again from the anti-vaccination movement. And the doctors who engage with the vaccinations, those who talked to the Israeli public and explained why the Israeli public needs to get vaccinations and so on, they were threatened and compared to Nazis. Here you can see Professor Galia Rav, and she was called Hitler's next neighbor in hell. She was also called Mengele, and she told an interviewer that she gets threats on her life, like she's a killer or something. And here is the recorded phone call that called her again, Dr. Mengele, that she puts poison in the bodies of children and elderly and so on. And it was the same for another doctor who engaged with vaccination to little children. So this was the situation in Israel in 2020. And again, we can see how a society that acts out the Holocaust, and again, it's not the first time that the Holocaust is associated in other topics which are not Holocaust related, like political, geographical, ethical, and so on. Here with the COVID, there was a burst of Holocaust associations. In the first half of the year, COVID-19 was compared to the Holocaust. And in the second half of the year, when the Israelis understood that COVID-19 is not the Holocaust, they still didn't let go of Holocaust associations, but just turned them in another direction towards the law enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, we'll save the questions till the end. Next is Johanna, who has a PhD in literary studies. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology of Literature and Cultural Studies at Jagiellonian University. She's the author of the monograph Historiography and Mythology of Femininity in the novels by Theodore Panicki, and an article Pandemiographies, I probably pronounced that wrong, sorry, Theories, Practices and Predictions. Thank you.
Czy coś tu powinnam uruchomić? Poratuje mnie pani.
Prezentacja?
Nie. Nie, tylko mikrofon. Nie, aha, okej. Dziękuję. Firstly, I would like to thank to organization for inviting me for this conference. In the book published in 2020, Is It Tomorrow Yet? Paradoxes of the Pandemic, Ivan Krastev notes that major epidemics change our world in a similar way to wars and revolutions, but do not leave comparable traces in our memory. Krastev has considered the mechanism of remembering in the face of a pandemic, citing Laura Spinell's publication, Pale Rider, the Spanish flu of 1918, and how it changed the world. A British researcher observed that the Spanish flu epidemic, which surpassed both wars in terms of the losses resulting from a single event, is situated on the periphery of collective memory. Krastev acknowledged that it's easier to count the victims of wars than of a virus, and points to the difficulty of narrativizing a pandemic. Referring to the psychologist findings on both memory mechanism and elementary narrative competence, that is subconscious knowledge of the basic shape of a story that has a beginning, a climax, and an end, the Bulgarian political scientist concludes that it's very difficult to write the story of the Spanish flu or any other major epidemic into such a narrative structure. Krastev draws an ironic parallel between the epidemic and Netflix series, in which the end of one season means only a temporary pause before the next. Moreover, he concludes that epidemic is more reminiscent of modernist literature than the classic novel, as it lacks a clear plot. The indeterminate trajectory of the pandemic, its processuality and non-conclusiveness, and at the same time the need to tame to fatigue and the unknown, has resulted in an expansion of narratives in the first month of 2020 that I refer to as pandemigraphies, narratives written from within the pandemic experience. Pandemigraphy is a search for a formula that allows for the description of a reality affected by an infectious disease. The subject of this narrative is directly or indirectly affected by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. He designing an individual narrative or seeking to be anchored in a community story, making a gesture of protest against the pandemic reality in the act of writing, reading, or social action. The pandemic, which doesn't fit into a clear narrative structure, has turned out to be a generator of various narratives, devoid of a distance, looking for patterns, experiencing the epidemic in literature and culture, and prognostic, opening up a post-pandemic perspective which prompt reflection on how the SARS-CoV-2 virus may reorient the future. I'd like to dedicate my talk to the different genres of pandemigraphies, the autobiographical pandemic novel, pandemic reportage, and pandemic diaries. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between pandemigraphy and the mechanism of individual and collective memory. Pandemigraphy is a record of momentary dynamic events focusing on the individual perspective of the writing subject, but they are also an attempt to establish an affective community of experience. In my analysis, I will focus on the following text. Człowiek, który czeka, pandemia na mansardzie, The Man Who Waits, Pandemic in the Mansard by Agnieszka Taborska, Wilcza rzeka, Wolf River by Wioletta Grzegorzewska, Pandemia, raport z frontu, Pandemic, report from the front by Paweł Kapusta, and selected text published in the post-competition anthology Diaries of a Pandemic, Pamiętniki pandemii. The title of the diary of the writer and academic Agnieszka Taborska, written between April and June 2020, shows the liminal state in which the author found herself returning from the United States to Poland for her sabbatical just before the first lockdown. Her planned journey through Europe transformed into an erudite journey in the footsteps of literature and film, which reflect and break the current pandemic experience, framed by the narrator in a highly artistic, essayistic framework. The result of the creative mansarding is a diary written during a time of forced spatial isolation. The diary is a record everyday rituals and practice during the lockdown, an insightful observation of the awakening spring in the world of plants, of animals, and finally an observation of the pandemic, serial reality from the perspective of a mansard. Taborska's notes are kept from the inside of the pandemic experience and at the same time from a distance. They are an example of the narrativization of the pandemic with the use of literary and film tropes, quotation and illusions. The narrator confronts her reflection with memories textualizing the experience of the plague, Jonathan Harker's diary from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, Daniel Defoe diary of a plague year, and Samuel Pepys diary. The narrator of the diary draws on a rich store of cultural memory to discover the commonality of pandemic experiences over the centuries. A radically different narrative perspective is presented in Violetta Grzegorzewska's novel Wolf River, which is based on the writer's diary initially published on Facebook, reporting on her stay in the UK during lockdown and growing panic related to COVID. I describe Grzegorzewska's narrative as a pandemiographic autobiographical novel in process, accumulating experiences related to illness and imprisonment in claustrophobic space inhabited by migrants, isolation as a source of domestic and sexual violence, loss of financial resources, and a sense of security, and the temporariness of existence. The pandemic sharpens the autoethnographic perspective of the novel's narrator, prompts her to rethink her own past, along with a defective family structure, a failed marriage, codependency syndrome, and suicide attempts, but also to focus on everyday micro-practice that, like the act of writing, allow for a momentary rooting in the uncertain pandemic reality. Unlike Taborska, the narrator of Wolf River is deprived of her own room, in the literal and metaphorical sense. The affective experience of the pandemic prompts the narrator to work through her own traumas and reflect on her difficult past. That is why when writing a pandemic autobiographical novel, she reaches primarily for the resources of individual memory. On the other hand, publication of the diary on Facebook fostered the creation of an affective community with readers concerned about the writer's fate. Paweł Kapusta's reportage, Pandemic, Report from the Front, is a raw account of places that could be a spatial metaphor for a pandemic. Single-name hospitals, infectious wards, ambulances, and laboratories. The author gives voice to medical professionals and those on the front line of the fight against coronavirus. In his reportage, he uses military metaphors as indicated by the subtitle, Report from the Front. In my opinion, this procedure doesn't only serve to fit the pandemic into the framework of the war narrative. His reportage can be read as a contribution to building social memory about the pandemic and its victims, and attempt to reformulate the notion of heroism associated primarily with war in the spirit of solidarity and concern for the fate of others. The author of the reportage gives voice to those whose perspective is marginalized and doesn't impose his perspective as superior. Paweł Kapusta's reportage is a polyphonic story about the Polish healthcare system during the pandemic, and the author only reveals his point of view at the end when he writes about how he himself fell ill with COVID. Writing activity during the first period of the pandemic was not just the domain of professional writers. Shortly after the announcement of lockdown, a rush of various forms of personal documentary literature emerged, bearing witness to the strange spring of 2020 and having a self-reflective and self-therapeutic dimension. The need to narrativize the pandemic experience was managed by institution and research teams that launched a competition for pandemic diaries and memories. The pandemic diaries revealed a wide spectrum of worried responses to the pandemic crisis, which was a communal experience but means something different to each individual and involved a different mix of affects, emotion, and ways of experiencing loss. It should be noted that components of collective memory played a very important role in taming the pandemic experience. The authors of diaries, in an attempt to interpret the pandemic crisis, reached for the resources of personal memories, but also family histories passed down between generations. As Mateusz Mazzini noted, the collective memory of the whole society as a community, expressed through shared rituals, symbols, and interpretation of past events, turned out to be a useful tool in the initial naming of the threat posed by the coronavirus. The end of quotation. That is why the authors of memories often referred to the Second World War or martial law. This is because these past events evoked association with the current closure of borders, restriction on freedom of movement, and shortage of supplies. However, as noted Mateusz Mazzini, the topoi of collective memory didn't withstand the unprecedented nature of the pandemic, both metaphorizing the virus as an occupier and referring to the notion of heroism, which occupies an important place in Polish collective memory, proved finally ineffective. At the same time, already in the first month of the pandemic, the mechanism of forgetting made themselves felt. Tomasz Michniewicz, in the introduction to the book Chwilowa anomalia o chorobach współistniejących współczesnego świata, Momentary Anomaly on the Comorbidities of Our World, which consists of interviews with representatives of various scientific disciplines and profession, he noted that our ability for forgetting is astounding. Thanks to it, we push traumas and difficult experiences out of our memory. We don't relive them over and over again. Therefore, as the author writes, just a few months after the first lockdown was announced, our emotional memory faded. Polish collective memory is still resisting the pandemic, and it's currently difficult to imagine pandemic memorials or anniversaries commemorating the victims of the coronavirus. If in the past plague columns were a votive offering for saving the population from the plague, today it's very difficult to imagine their modern counterparts. Of course, this lack of commemoration has to be considered from a post-secular, post-humanist perspective, but also from the perspective of memory studies. These considerations, however, are beyond the scope of my sketchy speech. It's worth nothing here the relationship between the pandemigraphy genres and the Chernobyl genres, which Tamara Hundorowa wrote about. According to the Ukrainian researcher, the pattern of the Chernobyl genre is Voices from the Chernobyl, the oral history of the nuclear disaster by Svetlana Alexievich. The reportage, which is a collection of interviews written 10 years after the nuclear disaster, proposes to see this event in terms of testimony and remembrance. Hundorowa point of that, the English title of Alexiewicz's book legitimized oral history as a current form of storytelling about the Chernobyl trauma. Alexiewicz introduced her own form of communication, polyphonic reportage supplemented with a small author's commentary. The poetics of the genre assumed the presentation of partial individualized perspectives. This strategy brings the Chernobyl's genre closer to the reportage and diaries created during the pandemic. In the introduction to the Memories of a Pandemic, the editor writes, there hasn't been a single pandemic. At least from the point of view of the authors of this book, there were exactly 44 of them, which is as many as the number of works submitted to the competition. It is known, however, that there were actually many more points of view because everyone experienced it, interpreted, and named it in their own deeply different way. There are other similarities between the Chernobyl and pandemic genres, such as the presence of an experience of disease caused by radiation and SARS-CoV-2, apocalyptic perception of reality, and finally, a focus on a resurgent plant and animal world in the zone and during the strange spring of 2020. Hundorowa also diagnosed the emergence of a new post-Chernobyl literature whose source is post-memory mechanism. According to the researcher, Chernobyl remains a current significant element of the present day, capable of producing new artistic forms. The end of quotation. However, it is difficult to expect that the pandemic could play a similar role if the mechanism of forgetting were activated during the first month of the lockdown. The experience of Chernobyl disaster, suppressed and subordinated to political censorship, was presented with a delay, and the pandemic caused an immediate movement of writers and an expression of narrative forms. This is the fundamental difference between the Chernobyl and pandemic genres. Pandemic graphics are rapidly depleted. The multiplicity of first-person narratives cannot and should not produce a single story about the pandemic, just as thinking in terms of an imaginary pandemic community is ineffective. If we assume, following Ivan Krastev, that the pandemic resembles a TV series, it's worth looking at it through the prism of the observation made by Olga Tokarczuk in her Nobel lecture. According to the writer, the series offers a kind of trance to the contemporary audience, multiples new narrative orders, but also doesn't shy away from anachronistic solutions because the potential materialization of another season creates the necessity of open endings in which there is no way that mysterious things called catharsis can occur or resound fully. The end of quotation. So maybe it's worth replacing the word series with pandemic and recognizing that. At the same time, the pandemic inscribes itself into the new, drawn-out and disordered rhythm of the world, into its chaotic communication and instability and fluidity. This storytelling form is probably the one most creatively searching for a new formula today. In that sense, there is serious work in the pandemic on the narratives of the future, on reformatting the story so that it suits our new reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fourth paper in this session is by Marta Kowalska, a graduate of the Faculty of History and Sociology at the University of Warsaw. She's now assistant professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Her academic interests focus on collective memory, commemoration, and methodology of social qualitative research. And in recent years, she has conducted research on the social impact of COVID-19.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for invitation and for being here. I hope you will enjoy the presentation because I wanted to talk about the memory of coronavirus, memory of corona pandemic in Poland. And I would like to take into consideration the questions about creating memories of corona pandemic when the pandemic still taking place or have just been declared over. Before I start, I would like to put your attention, I will try. Okay, I would like to put your attention on memory studies research point of view.
No, it doesn't work.
Okay. So I will say what I wanted to.
Maybe it will start. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I would like to put your attention on memory studies researchers' point of view, especially on the point of view of Aleida Assmann. Okay, it's working? Yeah, great. She's in 2020, she had an interview and she said, everyone has gathered very different experiences and perspectives about coronavirus. However, a standard narrative hasn't not yet been formed. And she said also, as long as you are in a process, you can form a narrative. Every story needs a beginning and the end. Needs heroes, needs opponents, and so on. With Corona, only the ending is still missing. Hopefully, we are now in the run-up to find sequences that will follow with the vaccination. I think it's important because it shows how we are thinking about, how the scientists are thinking about the memory of coronavirus. Because, you know, the memory studies as such focuses on the past. Most of events or processing taking place tens or sometimes hundreds of years ago, or group of people who were living in the past. So the memory is the past. That is the background to the studies addressed to the question of how the past is created and recreated within the new context, social context, cultural context, political context, and others. But what about the present? What about the processes, mechanism, and you know, there is still relatively little research answering to the question of how the memories are creating at the beginning, in time of they are taking place. So, I wanted to put some questions, how the experience of coronavirus becomes memories of COVID-19. How do we as participants, witnesses, or observers perceive them? What is important for us today and why? Which of them could stay significant? Which of our memories could stay significant for social groups? Why and how long? What actually we will remember about COVID-19 in the future? and what we remember now. Trying to answer the question, I get back to the research we did. The research were conducted in 2020, and we conducted 150 in-depth interviews. It was quantitative interviews, quantitative interviews. And we got back to the same people next year. We conducted 90 interviews, almost in the same period. And then it was the last revisit, let's say. It was in 2022, and we got back once again, the last time, to the same people. And we could see, and because of that, we received 3 different narrations about COVID. So the interviewees were different. There were young people, they were parents, they were seniors. They were women and men. They were people who were living in big cities, small cities, countrysides. And what was also interesting, it was the first time we used to use the tools like Zoom, Skype, or Messenger phone. For me, it was something new, actually. We were asking them about their lives, everyday life, social practices, families, how they manage with work, with their leisures, for example, and so on. What they are thinking about COVID, what they are thinking about the situation. So I would like to give you some examples about first reactions now, and then I will get to the next years, to the next reaction. So, what was important at the beginning? The most important, I think, were individual needs. The people were talking about themselves, and they were talking just like one example. I was actually happy because I had too much on my mind and I needed a break. So when I found out that my studies were going to be suspended for a while, it was a good thing. But I expected to come back soon. That woman said it was great because I had just a few days just for myself. Then something has changed because it was not just a few days. The people were wanted to remember the beginnings. And they wanted to underline that it was the process, not just one event. Something was coming, so one of the women said, I remember the beginnings. We had just been at work and I turned out that there were 2 cases in Olsztyn. In Cieszyn, sorry. I understood that this was close to us, right? Because if it was far away in Poland, you didn't feel it somehow. But when it was so close and the case in Cieszyn was one of the first, you felt it so strongly that you started to feel a little bit fear. So they were talking, of course, about the emotions, how they were feeling, what was important for them, how they felt puzzled a little bit. They didn't know how to react, what's happening. The people wanted to make also some comparisons, some connections with their knowledge, their own experiences. We also recall information about what happened in the case of pandemics from decades ago or more, yeah? About the plague or cholera. We looked for comparisons. Yeah, we are thinking what ifs, and we were reminded of some accounts from the war period because we have a kind of wartime, don't we? Something like that the people were saying. And it's because of the conference and because of the previous presentation, I checked how many people said something about Spanish flu. And it was 150 interviews, and only 5% said that it's something like Spanish flu. It's very interesting because, 2 years later, almost everybody said, COVID, it's like the flu. So we need vaccination, but it's like the flu. Important was also that people wanted to, if they were looking for connections for some example analogies, they were thinking about disease like one of the men. He said, besides there had already been so many of these different pandemics, some sort of mad cows, swine flu, and so on, avian flu, and so on. So they had no idea how to explain what kind of disaster, what kind of disease they have, what kind of disease it is. Well, but the people also had different tools. I think it was very interesting, especially in Poland, because they wanted to find some analogies, for example, in religion. So one man said, well, the big fear was for everyone, because it's like in countryside. People used to put crosses with double arms at the entrance to the village. Well, everyone was frightened that it would be the same. So what could we do? We could just pray. It's everything what could we do in that situation. But when we get back to the people, to the same people, in 2021 and 2022, many things has changed. The people were thinking about pandemics in different way. One woman said, at the beginning of the pandemic, I stayed at home alone all the time. I didn't go out anywhere at all, with my daughter sitting with me. But next year, it has already become normal that in general we have all stopped worrying so much about this pandemic, so to speak. We have mostly been vaccinated, and we don't worry so much. So that vaccination was very important for the people that year, and they were thinking, okay, we finish with it, and everything get back to the end. The pandemic will be over. In 2022, coming new events, and people started talking about pandemic in, once again, different way. The same woman said, my husband lost his job. However, that was in 2020. I think the huge inflation and the economic crisis is the kind of effect of the pandemic that everyone feels every day. And it was really crucial, I think, because people started thinking about the pandemic in different way. One man said, some of my annoying friends think that Putin has ended the pandemic because the number of cases, the number of people hospitalized, the number of people dying have been replaced by data from the Ukrainian front. The information on incidence of the disease has gone very deep somewhere. However, we are dealing with this pandemic because I constantly hear from my friends that they are getting ill. So I would like to, with this case, show you how the point of view has changed. We have new events, new very important disasters, so we have to think about pandemic in different way. And what is interesting too, how is the knowledge of the people. The people started talking like the people who are inside, you know, and who knows everything about COVID. They have the knowledge, they know what is going on, so they could talk about it. In 2022, COVID was a part of the life. There are some restrictions, one might say, but it's a small problem. They say there is inflation, inflation passes. There is pandemic, pandemic passes. And we will back to reality again. But what people wanted to remember was also important, I think. And of course, the people remember about the people who they lost it. One man said, talk to friends, you remember the dead. For example, I also lost a friend with whom we started at work in 1972. So he could still live. Death touched and happened to people close to me. But as they say, life has returned to the normal. So there was a need to remember about the deaf people, the people who, from families, from friends. But people wanted to remember also good things, not only this dark side of pandemic, but also about what happened during COVID. This is and especially they were young people, I have to underline. This is a period when, in my opinion, a lot of good things have progressed, such as awareness about epidemiology, sanitary habits, and all those remote opportunities to use various services, remote work, remote education. I want us to use these innovative solutions that are better in many aspects. So I think that when we are thinking about COVID, about memory of COVID, we think only about this dark side, let's say. But people wanted, in this time, 2022, they had the need to remember also something else. One man said, for example, well, my first child was born. It was a great time for me because I stayed with my child, and for me it was not so bad. Okay, I have to finish, so maybe I would like to, I will show you how, from my point of view, everything has changed. What was the process, mechanism, maybe not mechanism, but processes of changes. At the beginning, important were emotions. The people felt confusion, sometimes panic, they were puzzled. They didn't know how to deal with the new threat. Next year, they focused on everyday life. They wanted to know something about COVID. They had knowledge, new knowledge about it. They were thinking about vaccine, but they were still aware of what happened in the future. Next year, 2022, the people focused on the effects of pandemic. And it was very important also that they were taking into account the new events, new problems like inflation, but also the war in Ukraine. Of course, the people who are living in the part of Poland which are border with Ukraine, they were talking about Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine. So for them, it was the most important thing. The people in countrysides, somewhere in the middle of Poland, were thinking about everyday life, about the prices, about their own problems. So I should put some conclusions, but I have the questions, not the conclusions, sorry. The first is, what should we actually remember? Should we wait to the end of the pandemic, real end of the pandemic, and create our memories? Or maybe we should think also about the memories between. We should maybe, or maybe not, just choose one of the part of our memories, our experience, or and have some strong memories, or maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should think about where, when, how the pandemic was in different parts, for example, of Poland, different parts of the world. What should we commemorate? What we want to commemorate? What we should forget, maybe? We need the standard narrative or the experience, the multiplicity of experiences is important. And whose needs will be met? Individuals, politicians, or maybe scientists? It's also the question. Because of, I don't know, the theoretical background or something, what will be the tool for us? And the last thing is, what should we remember? Only the dark side of pandemic, or maybe also the bright side? How the people said in 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last paper of the day is by Wiebke Lisner, who is a research associate at the Institute for Ethics, History and Philosophy of Medicine at Hanover Medical School, where she's been since 2018. And she previously studied history, political studies and sociology at Leibniz University in Hanover.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me. I hope so. And I know I'm aware I'm the last person between you and dinner, so I try to make it as short as possible. So in my talk, I present you some first findings of my DFG-founded research project. The title is Pinning Down the Hypothetical Pandemic Preparedness Since the 1990s, Historical Preconditions of Managing Coronavirus Responses. The project I conduct together with my colleague Jonathan Voges. And so he is looking at the WHO side of pandemic planning, and I look at Germany as a case study. The basic idea of the project is to examine the process of internationally coordinated pandemic planning, which started in the late 1990s. So, but today I'm not referring to Corona COVID, actually, even though I'm on this panel, but the main focus is on swine flu in 2009 and 2010. And I explain you in a short while why. In January 2010, a hearing was conducted by the Council of Europe in Strasbourg to investigate whether or not the WHO had been transparent enough in its management on the H1N1 virus. The discussion primarily centered on the WHO's declaration of swine flu pandemic in June 2009, which subsequently triggered national pandemic plans in Germany and other European countries, and also worldwide. According to the 2005 passed international health regulations, it is up to the WHO to declare a pandemic when it becomes clear that the H1N1 virus was less dangerous than initially feared. Concerns were raised whether the World Health Organization and global public health officials had overstated its risk and failed to effectively communicate the reasoning and uncertainties of their actions. these assumptions had led to the hearing in Strasbourg. In times of crisis, such as a pandemic, effective crisis communication is vital. Cecile Sterenberger and her colleagues assert that crisis actors, such as health experts, can utilize crisis communication strategies to establish themselves as trustworthy figures, cultivate a positive relationship with the public, and play a crucial role in overcoming the crisis. In contrast, if crisis communication is mishandled, they state, it can lead to mistrust amongst the public. According to the British medical journalists Deborah Cohen and Philip Carter, trust was not successfully established between policymakers, health experts, and the public during the 2009 swine flu pandemic. The authors predicted that without changes in pandemic and information management, quote, H1N1 may yet claim its biggest victim, the credibility of WHO and the global public health system. In 2020, at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the media again pointed to deficits in preparation and communication. And using this 2009 swine flu outbreak as a case study, I'd like to explore the impact of epidemic experiences on pandemic planning to prepare for the next pandemic to come. I'm focusing not on individual memories, but instead on experiences of experts and the public expressed in published papers and public media, reflecting the pandemic events. Archival sources which I would like to use are not available for that time yet, because that's a different topic, but so I just rely on published papers. My talk comprises 3 steps. Firstly, I provide a brief explanation of the process of pandemic planning since the late 1990s. And within I contend that pandemic planning since the 2000 years has been founded on the concept of preparedness, which notions I secondly explore. Finally, I investigate the experiences of experts and the public during the swine flu pandemic in 2009 and their influences on subsequent pandemic planning in Germany. So, why did nations across the world instigate a coordinated global planning process for the pandemic since the 1990s? Following the fall of the Eastern Bloc, globalization was stimulated. As a result, there has been a substantial increase in the movement of goods and people, as well as pathogens. So that was was discussed within health experts, and on this picture you can see how they imagined travel routes of people and pathogens. So the idea that people and pathogens could could be all over in the world within matters of days or even hours, caused shock amongst the public, politicians, and health professionals. In a globalized world, the management of travel, routes, and human movements is a difficult task, leaving potential pathways for the spread of infectious body viruses and bacteria. Outbreaks of infectious diseases such as plague, Ebola, and avian influenza in the 1990s seemingly confirmed concerns about emerging infectious pathogens. As a result, policymakers around the world recognized infectious diseases as a significant threat to health, economics, and prosperity. The question was not whether there would be a global outbreak of disease in the near future. That was beyond doubt. The real question was when, where, and which pathogens would cause it. Viruses, in particular, were seen as a threat, and pandemics as the inevitable downside of globalization. As such, historian Malte Thiessen frames the history of epidemics from the 1990s onwards within the context of a problem history of globalization. By the late 1990s, it became apparent that the worldwide threat of pathogens necessitated an international reaction and security policy. The World Health Organization emphasized the need for an up-to-date method to tackle global health challenges that not only respond to but also prepare for infectious diseases. In 1999, the WHO called on its member states to devise well-coordinated pandemic plans, establish pathogen monitoring systems, and get ready for future pandemics to prevent the most potential catastrophic outcomes. I'm kind of irritated that somebody is talking in the back. Is it because you have a question, or what is it? No? Okay. So, anyway, in 2099, the WHO called its member states to devise well-coordinated pandemic plans, establish pathogen monitoring systems, and get ready for future pandemics to prevent the most potential catastrophic outcome. In 2001, the Robert Koch Institute, the principal public health authority in Germany under the Federal Ministry of Health, released a preliminary framework for a national pandemic plan. And as you can see on these pictures, that were some of the major aims of the pandemic plan, the national pandemic plan. And unlike prior years, the RKI, following the WHO, no longer presumed that it could avert an outbreak through epidemic control measures. Rather, the RKI aimed to brace for a possible catastrophic outbreak and release the first national pandemic plan in 2005. So the notion of epidemic prevention, which has been precedent since the late 19th century, has been augmented by the notion of preparedness since the turn of the millennium. The aim of prevention is to avert risks and therefore to influence societal and individual actions. The concept of preparedness instead emerged the concept of preparedness emerged during the Cold War as a military tactic to brace for a nuclear catastrophe. The term preparedness serves as both a source and an analytic term. And sociologist Andrew Lakoff first introduced the concept in 2007. I tried to write down some main aspects of preparedness, and such as like preparedness preparedness aims to intervene in a potentially catastrophic future in the event of an inevitable outcome that is addressed through comprehensive preparedness in the present. For instance, the goal of pandemic preparedness is to avert systems collapse during a pandemic and minimize death toll. Unlike prevention, preparedness does not aim to influence living conditions, but instead seeks to uncover vulnerabilities and fix them. The transition from prevention to preparedness has necessitated new approaches and planning strategies. Plausible scenarios, including morbidity and mortality rates, have been created to develop an understanding for the future and expand opportunities for present action. The use of scenarios allows for potential future events to become conceivable and therefore controllable. They highlight areas of insufficient knowledge and thus support their resolution. The deployment of simulations has enabled practical testing of scenarios. The process of pandemic preparedness thus relies on experiences, whether they have been garnered from simulation games or real-life epidemic outbreaks, and translates them into present practices and strategies that can be implemented to intervene in an unknown future. As Lakoff states, simulation games and real-life epidemics involve experiencing failure, since preparation never meet the actual necessities, and the focus is to uncover vulnerabilities and knowledge gap. This causes feelings of being unprepared. In 2009, the H1N1 pandemic, the first human-to-human transmitted pandemic since the start of internationally coordinated planning, internationally coordinated planning, made previously hypothetical assumptions of a pandemic more concrete. Just before the WHO declared the pandemic in June 2009, Jörg Hacker, director of the RKI then, stressed in an interview with the German newspaper Die Zeit that there is danger, but we are prepared. His statement conveyed a sense of assurance in a situation marked by uncertainty and scarcity of data. Nonetheless, communication among experts, politicians, and the general population proved to be troublesome in Germany. As physician Stollarz stated in 2010 in the medical journal Bundesgesundheitsblatt, this originated partly from the uncertainty surrounding what constituted a pandemic and what the risks entailed. The historian Rüdiger Graf, citing Reinhard Koselleck, argues that crises are not inherent in the world, but are constructed through narratives as a social challenge that is perceived as threatening. Thus, he points to the performative dimension of crisis, such as a pandemic. And this is well illustrated by the perception of swine flu in Germany, I think. In June 2009, the WHO proclaimed phase 6 of the pandemic, which declared the phase of an active pandemic. So this is the phase model of the WHO back then. And declaring phase 6 meant that pandemic plans and strategies planned for before were triggered worldwide. The WHO merely identified the pandemic as the transmission of the virus from individual to individual across multiple countries simultaneously, providing no indication for its severity. The pandemic plan of 2007, on the other hand, described a pandemic as a major emergency. So there you have the quote from the National Pandemic Plan. So, and that means emerge in an emergency that causes such lasting damage that the livelihood of many people is endangered or destroyed. The German National Pandemic Plan, based on a worst-case scenario, referring to the Spanish flu, which we have heard a lot about this today, and the public in Germany perceived the swine flu as a considerable danger initially as well. The RKI augmented this perception by publishing predictions indicating that between 2,000 and 80,000 individuals might succumb to H1N1. In fact, the infection rate in Germany was low, and a total of about 250 persons died of H1N1. As you can see here, the gap between the estimated and occurred death was stressed widely in the media in Germany. And so the yellow dots are the estimated or predicted death, and the blue dots are the occurred death. So just to give you a picture of it. And but also the RKI shortly after confirmed the data of low infection rate and low death rate. However, so there was a gap between perceiving the pandemic. But however, thanks to preliminary agreements with the pharmaceutical firm GlaxoSmithKline to develop vaccines to prepare for a pandemic and expedite approval for an influenza vaccine adaptable to the H1N1 strain, vaccines were rapidly brought to market in September 2009 already. However, once swine flu was found to be relatively harmless, public sentiment turned and fears were raised about the developed vaccine, resulting in only 8% of the German population receiving it, which you can see at the blue. The blue lines is the federal states, the different federal states, though. Just to give an insight. So I think this is interesting because when the German society first perceived swine flu as a threat, so it turned shortly after the first vaccinations came, were supplied. And the skepticism against the vaccines were based on the fact that the active ingredient used was recently developed and had only undergone recent testing. Additionally, there were initial reports of rare but serious side effects. And secret negotiations with German politicians and pharmaceutical companies raised suspicions that German decision makers were not only taking epidemiological facts into account when they decided to build up expansive stocks on vaccine doses and antiviral drugs, which they had done since the mid-2000s years in preparation for the next pandemic. And also they replenished those stockpiles during the pandemic, so they bought even new vaccines and medications. Gerd Gigerenzer, the director of the Center for Adaptive Behavior and Cognition at the Max Planck Institute, argued in critical reflection of the events that German experts did not comprehensively communicate their findings and uncertainties, leaving the public less informed about risks. The pandemic plan and also the health experts in Germany during the pandemic advised individuals to follow expert decisions instead. So that health policymakers and the RKI as health experts failed to present themselves as trustworthy crisis actors and failed to build up trust on the vaccines provided. I come to my conclusions. In Germany, reflections on pandemic and information management during the swine flu outbreak highlighted opaque communication practices during the pandemic. Journalists and social scientists assured health policymakers and the RKI poor competences in risk communication. The perception of swine flu, moreover, demonstrated that pandemics do not necessarily result in a crisis or disaster, as it was planned for and written down in the pandemic plan. At the beginning of the swine flu pandemic, estimated numbers of deaths brought up a narrative of crisis and catastrophe. The real-life pandemic events, on the other hand, proved to be far less dramatic and turned the narrative of disaster in its opposite. The weekly, Der Spiegel, even spoke of hysteria and overreaction. Health experts, on the other hand, assessed the swine flu as an exercise for the next pandemic and reassured themselves a successful containment. So this is what I think is interesting, that there's a real gap between perception of public and health experts. However, the swine flu pandemic revealed a lack of preparedness for different levels of pandemic severity. The revised National Pandemic Plan of 2016 therefore emphasized the need to not only rely on the WHO regarding the risks of a pandemic, but also to analyze them locally and to react flexibly to pandemics. The Pandemic Plan of 2016 also devoted 8 pages to the topic of risk communication. So you could say lessons learned. The experiences gained from dealing with swine flu were incorporated into the revision of the National Pandemic Plan. The example of swine flu, however, illustrates, beside the gaps in communication between experts, the public and politics, a main characteristic of the concept of preparedness. That preparations are never enough and need to be constantly adapted. To some extent, exactly this characteristic of preparedness might help to explain why the public again felt unprepared during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So, yeah. And however, so I'm sorry because I had made so many changes in my paper. I kind of missed the last sentence I just included, but however, the main topic is, I think, so it's, for me it's very striking that that the perception of the swine flu was so different, and that even though they that what experts and, well, mainly experts and politicians learned from swine flu were integrated into the pandemic plan, it seems like, even when we got to COVID-19, that the public was not aware of this whole pandemic planning process, and the media also stated, how could we stepped into the pandemic and being such unprepared, but ignoring that there had been a long planning process that until from the end of the 1990s. And what I asked myself is, how come that public in Germany, at least in Germany, didn't notice and was aware about the whole pandemic planning process? So maybe there's also a lack of communication, which occurred that the planning process was not properly communicated to the public. So, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all our panelists. So now would be a good time to have a conversation about the papers. We've got up to half an hour. I don't know if I'm sure no one will object if we end up finishing early, but is there any questions from the audience for any of the speakers?
I'm Alexandra from Klagenfurt, and I have a question to Liat, the second talk from about the COVID pandemic in Israel. All these phenomena, like she described, like you described to us. If they occurred also in Europe, so we had this vaccination opponents who also put the Star of David on, and I think we would call this anti-Semitism here. But how would you call this in Israel if this comes from Orthodox Jews? This is not anti-Semitism, but is there any term for this special phenomenon?
This is a great question, and I want to relate it also to the first lecture, because what we saw during the pandemic around the world are conspiracy theories regarding the Jews, and the word anti-Semitism must be heard here, because many parts of these conspiracy theories said that the Jews are responsible for the pandemic, the Jews are the pandemic, the Zionists are the pandemic. I have hundreds of examples. what happened in Europe during this time. And there is a vast difference between what happened in Israel, what happened outside Israel, because what happened outside Israel is based on anti-Semitism, on ignorance, and so on. But what's happening within Israel is something completely else. Israel is a state submerged in Holocaust awareness. We are raised on this commemoration of this terrible disaster, and therefore the Holocaust is an integral part of our identity. So when we use Holocaust associations, we as the survivors' descendants use Holocaust associations, and when other people address COVID while wearing a striped uniform or yellow badges, it's something completely different because we do it from the victim's perspective, because we have the ability to address it. We are part of the world of the victim. We are the descendants, but people outside of Israel usually blame Jews for the pandemic or out of ignorance created this comparison. In Israel, it's not ignorance. We know about the Holocaust, we learn about the Holocaust. And again, because we are submerged in Holocaust awareness, because it's a part of our DNA, we use it to describe other parts in our lives that do not relate to the Holocaust. As I said earlier, the associations to the Holocaust when relating to COVID-19 is just another link in a long chain of associations that we Israelis use because this trauma is such a big part of our lives.
I had just a quick question for Vika. Thank you for the talk, and I would love to see the planning process better publicized. I think that would have made it felt like we were winging it for much of it back in the UK and in the US, and if some of the planning process had been clarified, I think that would have. And do you feel that they will do better in that respect between now and the inevitable next one?
Okay, I think when I stick to the concept of preparedness, I would say no, because it's part of the pros of this concept that we are always kind of unprepared because we never know what future will how future will be. So we can all things which you plan and prepare for are perceptions of futures nowadays. So, but the future which will come might be a completely different one that we think of today. So this is the sociologist Ulrich Beck is doing this differentiation between the two parts of future, and I think this is an interesting insight that we have different futures, the future we think of today and the future which will be. And I think this is a basic problem with the whole pandemic planning process and the concept of preparedness, and so that we don't know what will come, so we prepare for things we assume to be, but what will come might be different. As you can see in this whole pandemic planning process, I mean, the whole world was preparing for an influenza pandemic. So the all national, well, the master WHO pandemic plan was focused on influenza, and so were all national pandemic plans. And but the pandemic, the last pandemic we had was SARS-CoV-2, so that was different. So the world was not prepared for that virus. And well, I think maybe it's not the point always to blame we are not prepared and we're not enough prepared, but maybe we could think more closely about what we want to achieve, maybe, and what, of course, in a pandemic case, it's always the aim to keep the death toll as low as possible. But when I think, yeah, but the question is maybe how we could prepare or make preparations, which actually, sorry, I think I have no answer because it's really difficult, and probably if I would have an answer, the world would be happy, but there is really no, but I think it's part of this concept of preparedness that we always are unprepared, so.
And I was actually thinking of very early writings, so for example, Famines that I'm aware of, and people start to sort of recall as experiences of the famine. So already a few years away from the start when everything was going wrong. And can you actually say there are sort of sense of stages, right? That sort of, for example, we're now looking back upon how it all began, and we look back upon what we thought was sort of the peak of the pandemic. But that sort of, it's still sort of an incomplete kind of narrative or narrative template, if I may reference James Birch's interesting work on memory and narratives. So I think that's one question I also had. And another one was, what you realize is when you read a lot of these very early memories, for example, of famine in literature, which I studied elaborately, is that they also sometimes go back to an earlier famine, or an earlier disaster. Borrowing a lot of the iconographies and borrowing a lot of the narrative templates and plot lines. And do you see anything like that happening when you are researching, when you do questionnaires, when you look at sort of the answers that you received?
Thank you very much. It's very important, I think, that what you are asking for. Of course, I have the same question. But I think that now we had a unique opportunity to see how it's working, you know, how the processes are made, how it actually works. So I think, and you are right, you know, it's really good to get back to the past, to our previous memories, previous experiences, and to check what has changed, what doesn't maybe, what should we think about. And, you know, the events like that, like the conference, is very important, I think, because, you know, we started thinking in another way about the past. And I think you're right. It's really important to know what happened before, what are our memories before, how it was changing. So I think I will stay with you with the question. Because I don't know, but I think it's important, and it shows us how we think about the past, about contemporary, about the future maybe too. Because we, how you said, we should be prepared also in that way, I think. Thank you.
I also ask a question. I'm Bartosz Dziewanowski-Stefańczyk from the European Network and from the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. And I have a question to Marta Karkowska as well. You showed the changing attitude towards the pandemic over the 3 years. Now, that was a general process, but could you dwell on how, or expand on how it differed between the countryside and the city? Because I believe that was a totally different experience. And now I'll give the mic to the other person.
Thank you very much. It's very important, I have to say. And we see so many differences between the people who are living in big cities and in countryside, between the men and women, between the younger people and older people. Of course, I had no time to explain everything, but you're right. You know, the example of the man who was thinking about the crisis, about the double crisis, was just an example. But the people who were living in countryside, they were thinking, you know, we are in bad situation. It's a disaster for us. But the people who are living in big cities, wow, that it's something, you know. They had problems. How they could stay in these small buildings? They have they have problem with going out. How to live in the cities during pandemic. So it was very, very interesting, and I think that it's also the topic. How the people in different situations, in different places also, how they reacted, what was important for them, how they imagine how the other people are thinking about pandemic, what is the life of other people's. It was especially important because we had no opportunity to check, you know, how the other people are living. So the people were talking also about that they talked with parents, for example, who are countryside, and the parents are saying everything is all right, it's okay, we have no problems, but they couldn't check. It's the true, or they just wanted to say that because of the good mood, yeah, or something like that. But you are right. The differences were really sometimes huge, sometimes important, very important, and very interesting, I think. Thank you.
I will continue. Marta, I also have a question to you. And my name is Ivan, and I'm a doctoral student at Warsaw University. In your presentation, what attracted my attention was you mentioning positive people's experiences, and in your conclusion, you were asking questions in different modalities, like, will we remember something? Should we? And I'm thinking about these positive experiences of people living through COVID-19. Do you agree that positive experiences can only be emerging, let's say, in individual memory, on individual memory level, and negative experiences were shared? So this is a matter of collective memory and collective commemoration practices. It's also, this question is in line with Alida Asman, who you quoted. So that's my question.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a tricky question, but I like it very much. And, you know, I think that the most important are our needs. So, and I'm afraid that, you know, we will lose something in the future. And we will, that's why I was asking, who will remember, who will build the memories? Maybe the scientists who wanted to put the experience in their own frames, maybe. Or maybe no, maybe we will remember in different ways, you know, different experiences in different periods, and it will be the most important. Maybe, I don't know, you know, we have so many testimonies, so many sources to check it and to build our memory, remembering also. So I don't know what will be happened, and I'm with you with the question, actually. And I think that I don't know now, but I hope that we will know in the future. So thank you very much for the question.
I have two remarks on the topic of preparedness, and one is an anecdote actually. So in 2010, President Komorowski gave a highest Polish civilian decoration to the Polish national flu officer from the Institute of Hygiene. I won't mention her name. And she was awarded for advising Prime Minister Tusk not to buy millions or tens of millions of doses of the swine flu vaccine in Germany, actually.
Oh, it wasn't Eva Kopacz?
I mean, no.
No?
I checked that,
okay.
actually.
Okay.
Hmm?
Okay.
So who was it? Yeah. No, I mean, the Polish national flu officer, so the scientist responsible for protecting or preparing Poland for coping with the flu pandemic, was actually awarded for advising not to buy vaccine, basically, you know. And she made a very risky decision that brought a huge save of money, basically. This is how it was interpreted, you know. So, but I think it's very meaningful, actually, you know. She was awarded for not buying the vaccines. And the second insight, if you ask me if Germany was prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic, I would say definitely it was. Because, for instance, the phenomenal, almost immediate coming out with the effective vaccine was partially an outcome of years and decades of the German, but the Pfizer pandemic, the Pfizer vaccine, I believe, was prepared in cooperation with the German company. So basically, they did it. It was founded on the decades of research and pharmaceutical development. So basically, who didn't forget the experience of the Spanish flu pandemic was the scientists and those ones who for decades worked over the vaccines, initially prepared for the flu, but then immediately they turned them towards the coronavirus. So it's just an insight, actually. Thank you.
I mean, it's... Okay, I think you mean Eva Kopacz, right? The health ministry in Poland back then, because she
decided to do
she decided, because it's interesting because in German media she was referred to very often and were referred to as a positive example of health politician in Europe to make like a very brave decision and prevented Poland from spending a lot of money for nothing, as the media said. So anyway, so I can't decide if that was a right or wrong decision. It's just, you know, the media, the public media in Germany decided to refer to her as a positive example. And also, what you're saying is completely right. I mean, there were preparations, and otherwise the vaccines during COVID-19 wouldn't have been there that fast. But my point was that the public media in Germany, as in other countries, at the beginning of COVID-19, blamed the public health ministry and public health experts for being not prepared. And we're asking, how come we find ourselves in such a situation, in such a mess, and we are not prepared? It was a feeling of not being prepared. So that was the thing I wanted to point out.
Maybe one more question to Max. Nope. Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to thank the panel again for an excellent set of papers. Thank you very much.